just a bit intermittent, that was all.
Okay, thank you.
Speed went dead on 2 for us. So, Chair, the feed is now live to YouTube. I'm going to click the record button and you're ready to start whenever suits.
Thank you.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you, and good afternoon and welcome to everyone this afternoon's Planning Committee meeting. Before we start, I would like to confirm which committee members and officers are here.
Thank you, Chair. I can do that for you. So in the meeting room today, from the Planning Committee, we have Councillors William Armitage, Jane Barry, Andrew Cooper, Peter Elliott, Mark Foster, Carol Huckabee, sorry, I'm just going to mute a microphone there. Mo Potts, Alan Powell, Tracy Reeder, Jackie Ridgway, Kathy Rouse, yourself, Diana Ruff, who's joining us from the Chamber, and Ross Shipman. Also in the meeting room today is Councillor Carolyn Rennick, who's acting in her capacity as a ward councillor, Adrian Kirkham, who's the planning manager, Jim Fieldson, who's our legal representative for this meeting, and members of the governance team who are supporting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. As you know, we have a protocol in place for a meeting in this virtual way, which I would now like the meeting facilitator to read out.
Thank you, Chair. So this is just a reminder to all members to keep your microphones muted, but your cameras on for the duration of the meeting. The protocols that will be in place will be that as per the meeting etiquette that we have for our virtual meetings, and it's to behave as if we were in the council chamber. Reminding members to speak through the chair at all times. If you could indicate to speak by either raising your hand, using the raise hand function, using the chat bar, and I will have the closed captions on for this meeting. So if I do see you, I'll put a message across the screen, which will also help the chair to see who's in line waiting to speak. When you are speaking, if you could introduce yourself as Councillor X representing Y Ward, so the public is aware who you are. Voting for this meeting will be done by roll call for each application. Just a quick reminder for members to be mindful of your home surroundings as the meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll move on to the agenda, and item 1 is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. There are no apologies for absence received for this meeting.
Thank you. The second item is declaration of interest. Members are requested to declare the existence and nature of any disposable pecuniary interest and or other interests not already on their register of interests. And any item on the agenda can withdraw from this meeting at the appropriate time. Have we received any declarations in advance?
No, Chair, no declarations received in advance of the meeting.
Do any members have any declarations? Thank you. No? Okay.
No, none received, Chair.
Thank you. Item 3, minutes of the last meeting. We now have the minutes of our 2 meetings held on Tuesday, the 22nd of September 2020. We will start with the minutes for the morning meeting. Are we all happy that these are a correct record? And if so, is there a mover?
Move it, Chair.
Is there a seconder? Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. Right, we'll move to the second set of minutes, which follow on. So is there a, if everyone's happy, is there a mover for these?
Move it, Chair.
Seconder? All in favour? Thank you. The motion's been carried for those. Item 4 is the planning applications. That moves us on to this main business, and as you can see, we have 3 applications, each of which has its own report, marked items 4A, 4B and 4C. I am happy with this and intend to consider them in that order. However, before we do this, I would like the clerk to explain for the benefit of members, speakers and public who are watching on YouTube how they will be dealt with.
Right, thank you, Chair. This is the procedure for considering applications at the meeting. We will consider the 3 applications in the order that they are set out on the agenda. The Chair will introduce the application, then ask the planning officers to refer members to any late comments or updates received since the agenda was issued. The late items agenda supplement has been published on the Council's website, and the link has been sent to committee members. The planning officers will then give a brief presentation, setting out the application plans and photographs from the site. The screen showing this presentation will be shared with those attending the meeting. They can also be seen on the Council's website through its YouTube channel. Following on from this, the Chair will ask each of the speakers, any ward members first, followed by objectors, then the applicant or their agent, to speak to the committee. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to put forward their views using the conferencing facility. There will be a reminder given by the clerk when 30 seconds remain. At the end of a speaker's 3 minutes, members of the committee will have an opportunity to ask the speaker questions, if necessary, to clarify any points they have made. When we have heard from all the speakers on an application, the Chair will open up the meeting for debate and for determination by a vote. Now, a note for speakers. Once the application you've come to speak on has been dealt with, you may leave the virtual meeting room. If you choose to remain, then please mute your microphone and turn off your camera. You will not be allowed to participate further in the meeting from that point. Now, as you're aware, this meeting is being live streamed. The Council will make a recording for purposes of preparing the minutes. Once the minutes have been approved by the committee, then this recording will be deleted. But please note that others may also record the live stream from the internet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll move on to the first application, number NED/20/00648. The application for the conversion of an existing stable building to a single dwelling, Hilltop Stable, Quarry Hill, Troway. In the line of our normal practice, I'm going to ask the planning officers to tell us about any late comments, reports that have been produced, and for the planning manager to give a brief presentation showing any photos and plans of the site. The meeting facilitator will share the presentation on screen. This means that I might find it difficult to see everyone. Therefore, I will allow the officers to complete their presentation and ask members to reserve any points of order or questions about the process until the end. There will be plenty of time for you to ask questions later on. I'm now going to go over to our planning officer for the first application.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair. This is an application seeking consent to change the use of an existing stable building to a dwelling and create an associated garden area with parking spaces to serve it. The applicant, Chair, states that the stable is no longer in use. Members will need to note, Chair, that the site is located in the Greenbelt and the Moss Valley Conservation Area. The stable is timber and timber frame, Chair, and the applicant states works to the floor, including introducing a damp-proof course, potential strengthening of the roof, although it's not clear if a new roof would be needed, insulation and other damp-proofing are required to facilitate the conversion. Existing openings would be used, but 8 new roof lights are proposed. In the Greenbelt, Chair, members will note that the reuse of buildings is not inappropriate development where the building is permanent and of a substantial construction and in other respects preserves openness. In this instance, Chair, officers consider that the works required to facilitate the conversion are excessive and the building is not of a permanent and substantial construction. Officers have therefore concluded, Chair, that the conversion proposed is inappropriate development and there are no very special circumstances to otherwise justify it. In terms of impact on openness, Chair, and the impact on the conservation area, officers consider the harm in both cases is neutral due to the enclosure of the site by trees and the level of existing development, which we'll see in a second on the photographs. Additionally, Chair, as members will note, officers have assessed the proposed works and how future occupiers of the building would experience the building as converted. Officers have concluded that the living conditions of those future occupiers would not be acceptable, reliant in some cases on artificial light. Officers, Chair, do not consider the factors outweigh their conclusions, or the factors outweigh their conclusions, and accordingly recommend that the application is refused. And if I can just ask Nicola, Chair, to share the presentation, we'll go through that with members. Just go on to the first, next couple, Nikki, please. That's great, thank you. Chair, as customary, the first slide shows the application site. It's the site outlined in orange, and you can see the dogleg L shape is an existing rough track that goes from an existing access to the site itself. The site, the building and the area surrounding it is in the small lozenge to the left-hand side of that orange shape. Thank you, Nikki. This, Chair, shows the application site edged in red, with the other land that's owned or controlled by the applicant outlined in blue. Thanks, Nikki. Closer up plans now, Chair, of the site itself. The L-shaped building is the stable building that's in situ, and you can see the two car parking spaces identified there. That's an existing hard surfaced apron, again, which we'll see in a second. And the area, Chair, to the left-hand side of the building, the west, is the area that would be formed of a garden to serve the new dwelling should it gain consent. The building is in the top right of that slide, Chair, where existing buildings on the site, again, which we'll see in a second. So in detail, Chair, this is the outline of the existing building, and as we'll see, it does comprise a traditional stable with openings to two sides, which formerly served the loose boxes and the other areas associated with the keeping of the horses. Thanks, Nikki. This Chair shows how the building would be post conversion should consent be granted. In general terms, Chair, it does utilise the existing openings, which are shown on that front and then on the side elevation, with the other two elevations currently blank. And you'll be able to see, Chair, that the 8 roof lights formed there, they do compare with the existing building, which shows no roof lights, although in a second, Chair, we will see from the photographs the what does look like inside the building some light coming through the roof, so there may be some roof lights there at the moment, but I'm unable to clarify that. All I can say, Chair, is that the plans do show 8 new roof lights in the roof structure. Thanks, Nikki. In terms of photographs, Chair, this is a photograph taken from the site access. You can see an existing access through the hedge to the access gate, and then the rough track that would be used to serve the new dwelling. And the stable is the building in the very centre of the photograph with the brown roof. The buildings on the right are other buildings, Chair, that occupy the site. Again, we'll see some close-ups of those next. Thanks, Nikki. And these two photographs, Chair, show a panorama sweeping across the site from east to west. So these are other buildings that exist on the site, Chair. And if you can go to the next photo, Nikki, we sweep round another building on the site. And then you can just see in the left-hand side, Chair, the stable building. And then behind that, there's the existing tree surrounding the garden area, which I've mentioned. And then the land in the ownership and control of the applicant is the area to the left, Chair. And you may recall previously we have seen horses and a variety of other small-scale animals on that area of land that the applicant owns. And then finally, Nikki, if you just go on to the next slide, please. This is the existing structure, Chair. It is a wooden stables, as members can see, with a traditional tinned roof. And just through the door on the left-hand side, you can just see what looks like a roof light in the rear slope of that roof slope. Although, as I say, Chair, taken from the plans, it does suggest there aren't any current openings in the roof, that 8 new roof openings will be formed in that area. And in the foreground, Chair, you can see the area of hard surfacing where on the plans it's shown that the 2 car parking spaces would be located. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any points of clarification at this stage? Councillor Shipman? You're muted, Ross.
Can you hear me now?
That's it.
Perfect, thank you. I'm Councillor Ross Shipman and I represent the Tupton ward. Adrian, you said in your presentation that the building is not considered as permanent by officers. Is that right? Because in the report itself, on page 21 of the agenda pack, second paragraph from the bottom, the report says that the current proposal complies with those criteria. Which one is it?
Just in terms of the outline on page 21, Chair, that relates to comments made by Councillor Rennick and that have been reported to members in the form that they were sent to us. In terms of an officer view, Chair, taking into account the submitted information and particularly the comments set out in the structural report that accompanies the application, officers are of the view that the works that would be required to convert the building exceed that which would normally be appropriate for a conversion, and in an officer opinion, it isn't of a permanent and substantial and permanent construction.
Am I not right in thinking though that it's considered permanent if it exceeds 28 days use in a calendar year?
It is a building in those terms, Chair, yes, but in terms of how officers are interpreting the policy set out in the MPPF, officers take the view that the level of works proposed go beyond those that would normally be associated with the conversion of a building to facilitate appropriate human occupation in terms of what is proposed. There's damp-proof course required, there's works to the floor, the strengthening of the roof, requirement to put insulation into the building to bring it up to appropriate standards. It's in that element, Chair, that officers take the view that it doesn't comply with the requirements to be appropriate and in line now for conversion without significant works. It is a decision, Chair, ultimately when members have heard all that's said to them and read the report, etc., you will need to take a view on as a committee, Chair, whether you agree with that or not. That's the officer view.
Right, okay.
Thank you. Any more points of clarification? Councillor Potts? Mo, you're on mute.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us, are there any utilities to the site as it stands at the moment?
Excuse me, Chair. I mean, I don't want to interfere too much in the process, but would this be the type of thing that you'd actually talk about in terms of the officer questions after you've listened to the speakers?
Can do. If you'd like to answer Councillor Potts, the others, it should just be for clarification.
Chair, I'm not aware that there is a problem in terms of laying on utilities to the site. There are buildings there, of course, but maybe an issue that the applicant or her agent are able to advise members on. In terms of the application form, Chair, that is proposal for the foul sewage to be dealt with by septic tank, and there are other arrangements for waste collection and etc. that are contained within that. So I don't think there's a technical reason why the building couldn't be used for human occupation, bearing in mind the other buildings that are already on the site.
Thank you. If there's no other points of clarification, we'll move on to the first speaker. I'm going to invite the speakers in order, as the clerk explained. They will each have 3 minutes to get over their points. They will be informed when 30 seconds remain. As members, you can ask them to clarify any matters that have been raised, but remember your question should only relate to the points which they have already made. If the technology fails us, we will ask them to send us in advance a written statement of their comments. These have been included in the late comments report pack. I would now like to ask our first speaker, they'll be taken in order, and that is the ward member, Councillor Rennick. We have no objectors.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to call this in. Having now had an opportunity to visit the site, I believe the new revised scheme does not constitute an inappropriate development in the green belt. My understanding, the application was initially refused on the grounds of not being substantial construction and the change of use therefore being inappropriate development in green belt. At the time, the committee concerned also expressed the extension and the alteration of the building that was proposed. However, I do believe the scheme has now been significantly amended, that no extensions are proposed and the amount of alteration substantially reduced. In addition, the structural report has been submitted to support this proposal, which I've gone through in detail with the agent and think actually it does stand. My understanding is planning policy and government guidance does allow for conversion of buildings in the green belt to other uses, subject to a number of criteria, including that the building concerned should be of a permanent, substantial construction and capable of conversion without significant alteration and extension. And again, I believe this current proposal complies with those criteria. The building is genuinely redundant. It was built to accommodate Mrs. Roper's horses, but after a serious accident, she no longer rides and now only keeps 2 ponies and a herd of rare sheep that do not need the stabling. So I'm satisfied this is not a case of speculative to the building, a stable block than seeking a conversion as a way of making money from this site. But is rather a way of using a redundant building and providing Mrs. Roper with a more suitable home from which she continue to look after her sheep and ponies. But in determining an application, the decision must be made based on the details of the case against the planning policy background. When looking at this case in relation to other similar proposals, it must be noted that at least 2 previous applications, the conversion of a stable building of the same form of construction to this application, one approximately just 700 metres to the northwest of this site, were approved in 2015 and 2018. And the considerations in these cases were the same as the current proposal, yet they were considered to be acceptable. So I personally have been at a loss to explain to the applicant how her neighbours have been able to have permission granted for same schemes when she has not. So in conclusion, on the view, this is a genuine and acceptable conversion that does not contravene planning regulations and does not, in my opinion, in any way contribute to urban sprawl. To the contrary, I think this building would benefit from a sympathetic conversion and is in keeping with the surrounding character and indeed will enhance the rural setting. So I hope members of this planning committee with the opportunity to review and reconsider this proposal and raise any additional questions to the agent or the architect who are also here regarding the the extra reports they've now delivered, and also take into consideration my views as ward
15
councillor
seconds remaining.
and the unanimous agreement of the Eckington Parish Council, which also supported this actual plan application. But more importantly, in the interest of consistency and fairness, I hope you consider recommending granting the approval of this scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any points of clarification from Councillor Rennick? No? Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Can move on to the next speaker, which is the applicant, Kay Roper. Hello, Mrs. Roper. You have 3 minutes.
Hello.
Be reminded at 30 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for agreeing to listen to the following points when considering our planning application. We were rather disappointed with the Asbury report, as they don't seem to have taken into account the changes that we made to our plans, all of which were suggested when our last application was refused. In our planning statement, we referred to 3 similar conversions in the near vicinity, one of which, Woodlands, is exactly the same construction as our own property. This seems to have been totally dismissed by Asbury, with the comment that it was block built, so we can only assume they were mistaken in their research or just used an example that suited their narrative. They also seem to dismiss the local parish council's response, which is in favour of our application, saying it was a late submission and so putting it into a negative light. We have taken on board all the concerns raised with our previous application and amended the plans. and also obtained a further structural engineer's report to mitigate all issues raised. The report mentions the lack of natural light. It's shown on the plans that each door will become a glazed window, together with an adjacent window and skylights. We purposefully didn't put windows on other elevations as we didn't want to alter the existing building to comply with previous recommendations. It's therefore our view that there will be sufficient lighting. It was always our intention that this would be a sustainable building with wooden construction, extensive insulation, air source heat pumps, solar power and grey water collection. As there's only the two of us, a small dwelling would be more than adequate and would release a family-sized property. So just to recap, the application has been amended to accommodate all the concerns previously raised. There's a structural survey to support the building's substantial nature and suitability for conversion to a dwelling. And there are numerous windows on 2 elevations together with roof lights to ensure plentiful natural light. It will be constructed following the community's and local government's guidelines for sustainable homes. Similar applications, i.e.
30 seconds remaining,
have recently been approved in the local vicinity. Both parish and district council support the application. I hope that you'll consider all the points which I've raised and look upon our application favourably. Thank you for your time and your consideration.
Thank you. Are there any points of clarification for Mrs. Roper? Councillor Rouse? Then Councillor Armitage.
Right, thank you. Hi, Mrs. Roper.
Hi, hello.
Just to clarify, will you be living in this property full time?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, yeah. We have a home not far away that's a big family home, and we need something smaller and on one level.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Armitage?
Thank you, Chair. It's been asked previously about are there any mains services already in place on the property?
Okay, so we have solar powered and we have water at the moment.
Right. So there's no.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Is there any mains electricity there yet?
No mains electricity, but it is on the road.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Mrs. Roper? Thank you, Mrs. Roper.
Thank you.
The next speaker, I believe, is the agent, Linda Trollope.
Yeah, the site is located in the Greenbelt and the Moss Valley Conservation Area, but planning policy in both the adopted and new local plans and in national policy guidance allow for the conversion of existing buildings to other uses where the building is of permanent and substantial construction. There is no absolute definition in planning policy as to what may be considered as permanent and as substantial construction. In the case of a building adjacent to the woodlands, approximately 700 metres from this site, which is not the building referred to in the officer's report, permission was granted for the conversion of a very similar building to a dwelling. The structural report for that application described the building as consisting of 20mm shiplap boards externally onto 75mm deep vertical timbers with a single brick course at floor level and door and window openings on the front elevation only. The floor was a concrete slab and the roof of timber battens supported by trusses and covered in metal sheeting. The floor required levelling with insulated flooring above, insulation to the walls and the roof trusses and battens strengthened by additional members. As with the current case, the building had a foundation in the form of a concrete raft to act as a floor and foundation, which is normal practice to support a timber-framed building. Our structural engineer's report came to the same conclusion with the current building, which is of exactly the same construction, that it is of substantial construction and suitable for conversion to a dwelling. Our proposal is identical to the previously consented scheme. The recommendation for refusal in this case is inconsistent with that decision. The officer's report indicates that it is not shown or clear if glazing is to be provided behind the stable doors. The plans clearly show that glazing is to be installed behind the stable doors in all habitable rooms, with the external doors to those rooms acting as shutters for the windows rather than as being functional doors. The roof lights already exist within the current roof structure. The retention of the doors as shutters is intended to retain the rural appearance of the building. The conversion would provide adequate light and ventilation to comply with the current building regulations.
30 seconds remain.
And would use sustainable methods of heating and energy to provide a good standard of living for future occupiers. In view of the above, the reasons for refusal are not justified.
Thank you. Are there any points of clarification? Councillor Mow-Potts, then Councillor Foster.
Can I just clarify if the tin roof will remain, and if not, what will it be replaced by? Thank you.
It would be another lightweight covering, which the timber roof would be suitable to, the timber battens in the roof would be suitable to support.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Foster, ward member for Colaston. As this seems to, it looks like it seems to hinge on whether this is meets the definition of being a permanent and substantial construction. So, for clarification, could you tell me a little bit more, Ms. Trollope, about the structural engineer's report and how it how that describes it meeting the definition of being a permanent substantial construction? So if you could give me a little bit more information on that, please.
Right, I have the structural report, which says that there's no structural defects in the building, either external or internal. No visible cracks or defect were noted in the floor slab. It accepts that a number of internal works would require to be undertaken, but as I have stated, those are exactly the same as were proposed and accepted by the council in relation to another building in the vicinity of the site.
Thank you for that.
Any further questions? Thank you, Mrs. Trollope. Okay, we move on to the next part. We now have an opportunity to put any questions to the planning manager and other officers about the application. Again, I'd like to keep this part of the proceedings focused on getting clarity about any points that you are not sure of. Once we have done this, we can then have our discussion about the application based on all we have heard and read.
Sorry, Chair, perhaps Nikki could clarify. I believe the architect was also wanting to speak on this.
I've just got that in brackets for questions.
I think that might have been firmed up. Is the architect here then, Nikki? Tony Jenkins, I believe?
Yes, he should be on the line.
Because I can't see him.
He's at the bottom of the screen, Chair.
Hello?
Oh, is that what I've got live? I haven't got a name.
Tony Jenkins, yes.
Chair, can you hear Mr. Jenkins?
No.
It's quiet for me.
No, Mr. Jenkins? Hi, I can see you now. Hello. Are there any questions for Mr. Jenkins, or would you like to speak first?
Well, I just got some brief points to make and really clarify and emphasise which the agent and the applicant have
You're quite faint, Mr. Jenkins.
the agent and applicant have mentioned these points, but we just wish to clarify and emphasise these from the committee report. The structural survey has obviously been questioned, but it's clear from the engineer's report that the building is capable of conversion to a dwelling. The foundation is substantial and the timber frame is identical, as mentioned, to the construction approved in the conversion of the application at the nearby property known as the Woodlands. We're utilising the lightweight sheeting roofing materials in order to minimise the roof load on the existing trusses and minimise any work required in the roof. On the issue of window openings, the report, as you know, states that it's not clear that these are shown. The stable doors have been retained for aesthetic reasons only, with glazed full height openings behind. It's clear from the submitted plans that the shutters are shown on plan by a dotted line with the window indicated in the usual manner.
We seem to have frozen.
Yeah, I think he's frozen there, Chair.
I'll just pause the timer for 1 moment, Chair.
Thank you.
You're back on.
Hello.
Sorry about that. We had a bit of a blip there with the internet. Am I on?
You are.
Okay.
Carry on.
So it was just to finalise, say that the openings obviously have to comply with building regulations for both ventilation and natural light, and they do comply. The committee should therefore, with respect, disregard the concerns with regard to the window openings, as it's been demonstrated that the building would provide good living standards if converted to a dwelling. That's all. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any questions at this stage? Councillor Armitage?
Thank you, Chair. It's really about the construction of the building. Now, you're talking about using lightweight roof cladding. Do I take it that this is something like plastic coated steel, which is used fairly largely in and around other buildings? Would I be right in this? And have you taken into consideration, will it be up to spec to with regard to snow loading and things like that?
Yeah, the roof material is, as you stated, it will be a plastisol, which is a ribbed metal profile coated in plastic. That will take a snow load, a reasonable snow load. I think the other issue is, it's obviously the building's got to comply with building regulations, so the introduction of insulation, etc., is mandatory. So I think to question that being works over and above conversion is not correct. You know, that would be necessary in any building conversion that does not meet the building regulation standards.
And I take it it's the present building is fastened to the concrete base, so making it permanent.
That's right. There's a sole plate at the foot of the timber frame, which is bolted to a substantial concrete slab.
Right. Thank you very much.
Any further questions? Councillor Foster?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I suppose it's a similar question that I asked earlier from the agent. I'm not so concerned about that it's timber framed and no foundations, because I think from my understanding, you can still meet the definition of permanent and substantial construction. So it's around that engineer's report and that structural survey, because the recommendations from officers seem to revolve around this definition. Can you convince me that, Mr. Jenkins, that this does meet those the definition of being a permanent and substantial construction? That definition, that it does meet the definition. Thank you.
Well, the engineer's report, as Trollope pointed out, is quite clear that there's been no evidence of any movement, any cracking. The building has been on the site for a considerable number of years now. So in terms of it remaining stable and of a permanent nature, I think that explains it, that it's proven by age. There is no noticeable structural failing of the building. So the engineer's report reports what is there, which is a building which is in no state of disrepair. And given the fact that this is not something which was erected a few months or a couple of years ago, this has been up around 10 years, I believe, maybe a little bit more. So I think that in itself is the evidence you require.
Thank you for that.
Any further questions? No. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
We now move on to the opportunity to put questions to the planning manager and the other officers about the application. Again, I would like to keep this part of our proceedings focused on getting clarity about any points that you are not sure of. Once we have done this, we can then have our discussion about the application based on all we have heard and read. For that reason, members, I would continue to be grateful if you could not move any motions at this stage until we have all had a chance to make our assessment. Thank you. Are there any questions for Adrian? I can see Councillor Armitage is waving his hand. Then Councillor Barry.
Councillor Potts as well.
Thank you. William, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps Adrian can clarify something as to what's classed as substantial and what isn't. And are there any standards which you have to go by, which you can refer to?
Chair, there is no definition in the MPPF of what constitutes substantial, but the normal dictionary definition would suggest it's something that is of considerable impact, and as set out in the officer report, the view is that the building in this form, with the requirements needed to convert it to a habitable use, doesn't meet that term of being considerable and substantial. But there is no definition, Chair, and it remains a matter of judgment for the decision maker, i.e. the planning committee in this instance, whether in the opinion of, from the information that you have, the structural report, the officer report, what you've heard, whether you agree with officers or not. Just reiterate, Chair, officers take the view that because of the construction of the building and the works required, that in officer view, it doesn't meet that definition. But that is ultimately, Chair, I think as Councillor Foster mentioned, that's ultimately the first issue that members need to assess in terms of whether the building is not inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, and to meet that test, it should be the reuse of a building that is permanent and substantially constructed and doesn't otherwise adversely impact on the openness of the Greenbelt and the Greenbelt purposes, Chair.
Thank you.
Well, could I come back to you on that? So it's really, as there's no definition, you can't really use the word substantial in this thing. It's only officers, well, it's what they think rather than what other people think. And when you consider that the number of, when we look at, there are timber frame buildings, in the area. I know there's one not very far from me, and there is a company called, a German company called Huff, and they make these Huff houses which come together, flat packed, and they just bolt them together. And the house is up within about 10 days. So I don't think you can use the term substantial because there's no definition on it in planning terms.
Yeah, just on that point, the term substantial is not an officer term, it's the one set out in the NPPF, Chair. And the dictionary definition, as I've just discussed with Councillor Armitage, normally means significant in size or value or importance or something of that nature. It suggests a substantial construction, and members will need to take a view on whether this is of that ilk. Just in terms of Huff houses, Chair, Councillor Armitage may be better versed with the Huff houses than I am, but my understanding of them, Chair, is exactly as Councillor Armitage has mentioned, that they are timber framed, and by their very nature they are significant and substantial in my opinion. And this is currently a traditional stable of single skin wooden boarding, Chair. And I don't think the comparison with the Huff house is appropriate in those terms in this instance. But ultimately, Chair, it remains a matter for the judgment of the decision maker, i.e. the planning committee this instance, to come to a conclusion on that matter, bearing in mind all that is read, that you've read and heard.
Thank you.
But you did, if I could just come back to you, you did say about substantial in size. Now, there was no mention of size earlier.
Just reiterating, Chair, what I understand is the dictionary definition. Members will have their own view of what constitutes substantial, I'm sure, Chair. It's just an officer view that is normally something of significance.
Thank you. We'll move on from that. Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Chair. Adrian, can you just clarify for me that this area is not part of our local plan? It doesn't appear in our local plan as an area for development.
Chair, it's within the green belt and the countryside for planning purposes as set out in your development plan. But just to remind members, Chair, that the NPPF and your own policies don't necessarily preclude greenbelt development. It should just be appropriate development if it is permitted in the greenbelt, and overridingly protect the openness of the greenbelt from unnecessary and inappropriate incursion.
So can I ask, if this was to go ahead, this building, and there was extra traffic to and from the building, albeit there's only 2 residents going to be there, but there could be family members, friends, blah, 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 would that not class as part of the impact on the greenbelt?
Members will need to assess, Chair, whether the change of use does have that impact of incursion into the greenbelt, resulting in unacceptable development. Officers on that issue, Chair, have taken the view that in terms of that impact on openness, this development wouldn't have an adverse impact. It would be neutral based on the fact that there is currently stables there that may attract in itself comings and goings. There are other buildings on the site, Chair, and perhaps more significantly in this case, the curtilage that would be supporting the dwelling would be enclosed by the trees on the photographs that we saw earlier. So an officer conclusion in terms of that narrow issue of openness, Chair, would be that the impact of this development would be neutral. But again, Chair, members will need to take a view on that, because that's one of the elements of the NPPF and your own policies that needs to be assessed and developed to be not inappropriate should overall preserve openness.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Potts.
Thank you. Councillor Barry's actually picked up one of the points that I wanted to make, and that was about traffic movements to and from the site if it became a dwelling, because there aren't any people living there at the moment. So I think that has been covered. The only other point I want to make, and it's just clarification really, much has been made in the presentation about comparing this building to one that had permission a while ago. But is it not correct that we are not allowed to look at previous decisions, and each application must be therefore taken on its own merit? Thank you.
Yes, Chair, that's certainly correct. Other instances are often quoted at us, but yes, members need to take this decision on the merits of the application before you. And again, as I've mentioned, all that you've read and heard, and to veer away from that just because something else may have been approved or refused would not be appropriate. You need to consider this on its own merits. Yes, indeed, Chair, because the circumstances around other buildings, other applications could be different, and issues taken into account by the decision maker in those instances may also differ.
Any further questions? No. Well, thank you for that, Adrian. And this leads us to the final part of the process, our discussions about what we've heard and what we think and where we want to decide. But before going any further, I would like the clerk to remind us about motions.
Right, thank you, Chair. Please bear in mind, members, that a motion must be moved and seconded before a vote is taken. If an amendment to a motion is moved and seconded, then the amendment will be voted on first. If a motion is to be moved, which goes against the officer recommendation, then the member who has moved the motion must give the reasons for doing so. The reasons for moving a motion against officer recommendations should comprise the relevant planning issues and be supported by evidence as necessary. If a motion to reject officer recommendation fails, or in other words, it is not passed, that doesn't mean that the recommendations are automatically approved. Rather, you will need to take a positive decision through a further motion in favour of the recommendations or another course of action. This will need to be approved by the committee through another vote. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Having heard and read everything today and the officer's recommendations before us, what is the view of the committee on the application? I am now opening the floor for a motion. Councillor Barry, Councillor Foster.
Chair, I'd like to move that we go with officers' recommendations.
Councillor Foster.
I was going to propose a different motion in that we give planning permission for reasons I can outline.
Okay.
In fact, would you like me to outline those reasons now and speak now? Because somebody may wish to second.
Yep, please
would you
do.
like me to do that? It seems to revolve around two issues here. One, in that the building meets the definition of permanent and substantial construction. I'm already satisfied that it does from the engineer's report and from what I've heard today. I know that timber framed and buildings with no foundations still meet that permanent and substantial construction. It's been there 10 years, so I'm happy with that. On that part, I've heard enough to say that it is permanent and substantial construction. So that's the first thing. The second one, when it says in the second part of the recommendations from officers, about lack of openings to facilitate natural light. On that part, we've heard that it will follow building regs. So I think it covers that part. It's the same footprint. It's not affecting neighbours, and we already know it's not going to affect the openness to the green belt. So I'm happy with that. We've heard that the Eckington Parish Council and the ward member are both in favour of this planning permission being given. So for me, all that's enough, and I'm happy to propose that we give planning permission for this.
I second it, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Shipman, I saw you had your hand up.
You're muted.
You're muted, Ross.
Hello.
That's it.
All right. I also agree with Councillor Foster and Councillor Armitage. I think the fact it is under everything I can look at when I've been doing some research, it meets the definition of a permanent structure under the Town and Country Planning General Permitted Development Order in 1995. It defines that a permanent use is a property which exceeds 28 days in any calendar year of being erected. Therefore, I mean, this has been up, what, 10 years, did the presenter earlier? Therefore, to me, it meets that definition, which to me means they should have the opportunity to convert it, obviously if they meet then the other conditions. I say this every meeting, but we do need to be consistent in the applications that we're deciding on. If one of these, I know planning officers say that we must discount all the planning applications that come in, but the reality is if one's been converted from the exact same structure, and actually our policies that we've adopted subsequently have only gone on to support that sort of development, of course we have to look at it and make a consistent decision in favour of approving this development. I don't know about anyone else, but I actually love this development. It sounds to me like the most sustainable development that we've had in front of this planning committee since I've been on here. And I think that the fact that it's not connected to the mains is a great thing in the using solar power. You can have ground source heat pumps. It's got everything going for it that means we should be approving this and shouting from the rooftops. Like, we need more of this in North East Derbyshire, not less. I'm absolutely in favour of this, and I fully support Councillor Foster's and Armitage's motion.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Councillor Barry, I saw your hand was up.
Yes, it was. Also, Councillor Reader's hand was up before mine, actually. I want to come back a bit because you sort of jumped in with what you want to say before we'd had a chance to even second the motion that I put forward. So I sort of contradict what you're saying because I don't believe that the structural engineer's report gives us what we need to say that it's a permanent structure. I'm not happy with what they've read out on that, I'm afraid to say. As far as, you know, new developments, I don't mind new developments, and especially ones that are going to be green, but not in the green belt. We've been fighting hard to keep our green belt as green belts, and this sits outside of the local area. It's in our green belt. It's not part of our local plan, and therefore it should not be taken into consideration. And as it said before, it's each case on its merit. I can't remember what the rules and regulations were around the others that have gone through, but as far as I'm concerned, we're taking this. I put a motion forward. I presume that Councillor Reader was seconding that motion, but I'll leave it over to you now, Chair.
Councillor Reader, I'm sorry, I can't see you very well. It's very dark in there, but if you'd like to speak now, please do.
Chair, I did have my hand up before William Armitage interrupted me and seconded Councillor Foster, so I was going to second Councillor Barry, and I was sort of drawn to 8.3 in the report regarding it not really being a suitable building for residential conversion, and much to what Councillor Barry has already said. So I'm a bit disappointed, Chair, that I didn't get to put my second in at the right moment, but you're running the meeting, so we'll just see what happens.
Okay, I'm going to Councillor Foster, and then I'm going to speak to the clerk.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The first thing, I can understand there is some confusion when people put their hands up and it's difficult to see who wishes to speak. But as Chair, you did ask both myself and Councillor Barry to speak at the same time. So I accept that, and I did speak just after Councillor Barry. There is a motion I put forward. It has been seconded. I'd like to go to the vote on that. But just secondly, with regards to what Councillor Barry mentioned there about the greenbelt there isn't the issue. We've already been told by officers that it wouldn't be harmful to the openness of the greenbelt. So it's not that way actually. It's a good point that we want to protect the greenbelt, but that's not the case here. That's not been argued that it would affect the openness. It's the other 2 points that were mentioned in recommendations, and those are the 2 points I've addressed in the motion. So I don't believe it will affect the greenbelt at all. That's not a question. So I'd like to move to the vote, and that we give planning permission for this development.
Thank you. I'm going to go to our clerk, Alan, just for some clarification on the order I should be taking this in.
Well, essentially, Chair, you've got two motions, but they are diametrically opposed. So I don't think you could actually say that one would be an amendment to the other. The first motion, which was seconded, was that the committee go against officer recommendations and accept the application. I'm sorry, and accept the application. Now, I'd suggest before you actually move to the vote on that, you'd need to probably clarify as to what exactly the reasons were for purposes of sort of the, you know, the decision. So anything that you'd need to say on that, Adrian?
Just on that, Chair, I do think that Councillor Foster has identified the reasons why he believes that the that permission should be granted in this case. I'm happy that sufficient reason has been set out why that will be the case, Alan. So I don't think in this instance, if members are minded to grant consent, that any further justification is needed. But what I would say, Chair, is if you do take the vote on that and permission is granted, that ideally that permission is granted subject to any necessary conditions, Chair, being delegated to myself in consultation with yourself and the Vice Chair.
Thank you. Yes. So we've got a motion and it's been put to after we've gone to the vote. So Councillor Foster, would you like to put your motion again to the committee?
Does it need any further clarification? I can go through it again if you like, but to give planning permission for those reasons I mentioned.
Okay, is everybody happy with the clarification?
With the final conditions being determined in consultation with yourself and the planning manager, Chair.
I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
So we've had a seconder by Councillor Armitage, also followed up by Ross Shipman. Can I please now have a show of hands?
No, Chair, we're going to do this. Sorry to apologise. by a roll call.
I do beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chair. So if members could clearly indicate for, against or abstain. Councillor Armitage.
For.
Councillor Barry.
Against.
Councillor Cooper.
Abstain.
Councillor Elliott.
You're on mute, Peter.
Against.
Thank you.
Councillor Foster.
For.
Councillor Huckabee.
You're on mute, Carol.
For.
Councillor Potts.
Against.
Councillor Powell.
For.
Councillor Reader.
Against.
Councillor Ridgway.
Against.
Councillor Rouse.
Against.
Councillor Ruff.
For.
Councillor Shipman.
You're on mute, Ross.
For.
Sorry, Chair, I was just making sure that that was correct before I gave you the result. We have 6 votes for, 6 against, with 1 abstention, which means the vote is tied, and that could go to your Chair's casting vote.
4.
On that basis, then the motion would be carried.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We can move to the next item. Application 4B, which is NED//20/00570/FL. Over to you, Adrian.
Apologies, Chair, I was muting myself. I'll do a brief introduction, Chair, before I ask Nick if she'll share the presentation with yourself and members. And in this case, Chair, the applicant is seeking consent to construct a log cabin to be used as a holiday let. The cabin, Chair, would be 2.5 metres high and be constructed of oak with a slate roof. Access to the cabin would be via a footpath through woodland from a parking area that would be created close to the road, Chair. And in this instance, elements of sustainable energy would be attached to the building, Chair. The site in this case, Chair, is located within a special landscape area where new development is permissible, providing it does not detract from the surrounding landscape. It's in keeping with the countryside and not in a prominent position, and therefore creating a prominent intrusion. The policies Chair set out in the National Planning Policy Framework are generally supportive of suitably scaled and designed new tourist development and reflect the Council's emerging local plan policies, although as members will have noted from the officer report, the extant development plan policies are somewhat behind that and don't conform, in officer opinion, to the NPPF policies, and therefore should be attributed limited or very little weight. And the neighbourhood plan, Chair, also seeks to protect the countryside from inappropriate development, but again does not preclude development if it is appropriately designed and located. Officers have concluded, Chair, that the chalet and associated development is suitably designed and located such that the integrity of the local area would not be harmed. Issues of highway safety and ecology, Chair, are considered adequately addressed, and as such, officers conclude that development is acceptable and have accordingly recommended that permission is granted. If I can just ask Nikki, Chair, to share the presentation. Please. Yes, I need to. There we are. That's okay. This is the site, slightly exaggerated, but that's where access from the road would be formed, the parking area there, and then the narrow strip would be the foot access to the site itself, which is an area of meadow set within. Thank you, Nikki. This, Chair, again, as customary, sets out the application site. You can see the proposed log cabin, Chair. The other buildings that surround the site comprise the, say, with respect to the hamlet of Brockhurst, it's a limited collection of buildings, Chair, forming together, but the site is located in proximity to those, and particularly to the former mill, which is where the applicants reside. And you can see the other land owned by the applicant, Chair, set out in blue on that slide. Thanks, Nikki. Just in some detail then, Chair, the dog leg to the left-hand side of the slide is the highway, that's Mill Lane, and then members will be able to see access from that. There's currently a gate there, but it would be an area of parking that would be located close to the road, and then a footway that would be formed through and over an area of trees to the chalet, which you can see, which is the red square at the centre of the drawing. It is set within a field that is then surrounded by other trees, as you can see there, Chair. And you can see the applicant's property, Brockhurst Mill, just to the southeast of the application site, just within the other land edged in blue. Thanks, Nikki. This is the building itself, Chair. It's a limited building in terms of size, with a room with two, a living room with 2 bedrooms off and a bathroom. You can see it's of cruciform form, and as you can see there, the reference to the panels in the roof. That's one of the features that I've just mentioned in terms of sustainability. So there would be solar panels on the roof, Chair. Thanks, Nikki. I think we move now, Chair, to some photographs. This is the existing access off the highway, Chair. There's an existing gate there. And this is the area where the parking area would be formed. Then you can just see off to the centre of the photograph, there's the woods there, but the footway would go towards the right-hand side of that photograph. You can just make out a wall going from the roadside wall in a direction straight forward from the photograph. So the footway will be formed through those trees, and it's up and over a mound, and that forms part of the officer conclusion that, generally speaking, the cabin itself would be well screened from any public viewpoints. There is a public footpath that runs across the other side of the stream that we'll see in a second. That would only provide limited views of the cabin from there through a tree screen, Chair. Thanks, Nikki. A couple of photographs of this location, Chair. That's now looking in the other direction, the gate that we've just seen on the left-hand side. You can see the wall that I've mentioned there on the left-hand side, and against that would be the footpath that would go from there through the trees. Thanks, Nikki. Again, Chair, that's just looking in the other direction. Again, you can see the wall in the foreground on the right-hand side, and just in the very near foreground is the stream that would run then back through the woodland round the mound that I've mentioned and borders the site. Thanks, Nikki. This is looking back from where the footway would go, Chair, back towards the road, and you can see the gate just in the wall there, and that's where the parking area would be formed. And there is a cesspit proposed, Chair, and that would be located just beyond the trees on the right-hand side, just in and adjacent to the footway. Thanks, Nikki. And this is the mound that I've mentioned, Chair. The footpath would go from the middle left of the photograph behind those trees, and then over the mound that you can just see in the middle right of that photograph towards the application site. Thanks, Nikki. And this is the site itself, Chair. The cabin would be formed on the left-hand side of this paddock. On the right, you can just make out a stream that's referred to in the officer report, Chair. And this is the tree screen that I've talked about that would surround the site, meaning that the building located here would be difficult to see from any direction, although the footpath that I've mentioned is to the right-hand side of this photograph beyond the trees that you can see there, and it runs roughly from there along the top of those trees through the field you can make out in the distance of the photograph. Thanks, Nikki. Then here, Chair, the site is to the left. It's the meadow, the paddock that I've talked about. And this is a stream on the right-hand side. And members will note from the report that the site itself is within the flood zone 1 and not an area that you'd normally associate with flooding on a normal basis. Thanks, Nikki. And again, Chair, now looking back across the site, this is from within and adjacent to those trees. I've mentioned the stream you can just make out in the foreground of this photograph. So the application site is the paddock that's there, and the building itself would just be on the far side of there, just underneath the bank on the far side. Thanks, Nikki. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. This is just a quick one. Is there any clarifications regarding the slides that you've just seen before we go on to the speaker? No, thank you. I believe we've only got one speaker for this application, and it's the applicant, Harry Caldecott.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Caldecott. You'll be given 3 minutes, and then you'll be reminded at 30 seconds when your time's nearly up. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, and off you go.
Hi, it's Harry Caldecott, the occupier with my family of Brockhurst Mill. And first and foremost, thank you all for allowing myself to speak at today's committee, where I simply wish to offer a better background to ourselves as a family and our intention in terms of this application. Having been brought up in the Ashover parish, my wife and I are very attached to the area and instantly fell in love with Brockhurst Mill when we stumbled across the property quite unexpectedly. Since becoming owners, we have worked tirelessly on the mill and surrounding area, paying particular care and attention to its heritage and character at all times. We've planned to make Brockhurst Mill a home for life, where we believe the work we have done to date is testament to our core values, respecting all those that have gone before us, whilst enhancing the property and area for future generations. More specifically, and in terms of our planned proposal, from the very outset, we have gone to every length to ensure we have put forward a suitable and sustainable proposal that meets a wide range of criteria. Having spent a great deal of time considering all forms of building structure, we have settled on something we believe to be truly unique and importantly, an asset to the local area. Thereafter, we began an even more challenging task of ensuring we could not only build the cabin itself, but also access and use the facility year-round without compromising the natural landscape and habitat which remains central to our overall proposal. Having engaged with the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, Armstrong Ecology, and various members of the local parish and walking clubs, we are pleased to have come up with a solution that appears to tick all the boxes, whilst also enhancing the biodiversity of our site. We appreciate and have embraced all feedback and suggestions put forward to date. In terms of the cabin, guests will park within our site just off Mill Lane, where they will then embark upon a meandering path specifically designed to not only protect but enhance the natural flora and fauna. This symbiotic relationship with nature will remain central to our guest experience during their stay, and we hope encourage them to visit again. Guests will be encouraged to stay local and make the most of everything our truly unique area has to offer, where we hope our one-of-a-kind offering will encourage people that may have never visited the area before. On arriving at our proposed cabin, guests will be completely secluded, immersed in nature, and away from all neighbouring properties. Guests will find the cabin to be made of fully sustainable and recycled products, with the oak structure and stone slate tiles ensuring it blends seamlessly with both Brockhurst Mill itself and the natural landscape in which it sits.
30 seconds remaining.
Finally, and before I run out of time, as a family, we remain acutely aware of the responsibility we will undertake should planning be granted for our woodland cabin. By this, we're not only talking about the natural and built environment of Brockhurst Mill, but also the wider community, and hence further reason for us to ensure our cabin is designed, constructed and maintained to the very highest standards. Should anyone have any further questions, I'd be very happy to answer.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Councillor Ridgway, you were up first, then Councillor Armitage.
Yes, thank you for that. My only concern is, I've been looking at the pictures, is I think it's a beautiful site, but how are you going to construct this without knocking trees down to get, are you using diggers to dig the area? I just wondered how you're actually going to construct it without damaging the area that you're going to build in.
Yes, it's a very good question, and that was we undertook an ecological report and engaged with Derbyshire Wildlife Trust to make sure that we could access the site with a small digger, which would be required without removing any trees at all. Now, there are actually two ways into the site where the digger would be required, both of which can be achieved without removing any trees, and thereafter, once we've completed the work, we actually hope to plant more native species and enhance it further. So I'm extremely confident we can do that at the right time of the year as well. So it won't be done during the winter, for example, where we'd rip everything up, or, you know, it will, but there is a strategy in place, and I'm probably not explaining it overly well, but I would be happy to better demonstrate that. But yes, that was a great concern of ours as well, if truth be known.
Councillor Armitage.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I must admit you've done a good job at the mill, and you're to be congratulated on that. There's one thing that concerns me, and that's the septic tank and its location. Now, as far as I'm concerned, septic tanks need to be emptied from time to time, and there's no road access to get a tanker or anything in to empty it. So you will have to make a road, I'm quite sure. Is that correct? And the other thing is, you mentioned that it's for all year round occupation, this building. Would I be correct in that?
Hello, William. Yes, the second question, yes, it would be for all year round accommodation. That's the intention. That's what we would hope to achieve. I know it might be a bit wild and rustic in the winter, but guests that come here, we would, it will be made fully aware of what to expect. So if they want a red carpet rolling out, they're going to the wrong place. You know, they want to go to the Ritz or somewhere. This is a different experience. But in terms of the cesspit, where we've had it located, you would be able to access it from the road, and they can pump the cesspit just like in fact, the same method of emptying the cesspit for our current property would be used for emptying the cesspit for the proposed cabin. I think it can go up to 40 metres in terms of the piping to drain that, but admittedly, the vehicle would be parked on the road during that period of emptying the cesspit tank. Potentially, and it might be possible for them to come onto the parking area, which we plan to construct if necessary, but it's never been an issue in terms of the mill itself to date.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Haldicott. Are there any questions for Adrian? Oh, very blank. Okay. So now I open the floor for any discussion. Councillor Barry?
Yes, Chair. Basically, I don't think there's an awful lot to say about this application. I think it's been well thought out. So I'd like to go with officers' recommendations.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
And I'll second that, Chair.
Well, I've got lots of hands going up, but Councillor Ridgway was up first. Okay. Is everyone happy to move that motion? If we go for a roll call then, Nikki?
Thank you, Chair. If members could clearly indicate for, against or abstain. Councillor Armitage.
Abstain.
Councillor Barry.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Foster.
Abstain.
Councillor Huckabee. Councillor Huckabee, I'm just asking you to unmute your microphone.
For.
Councillor Potts.
For.
Councillor Powell.
For.
Councillor Reader.
For.
Councillor Ridgway.
For.
Councillor Rouse.
For.
Councillor Ruff.
For.
And Councillor Shipman.
For.
Chair, I make that 11 votes for with 2 abstentions. The vote is carried.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.
So just to clarify, officer recommendations have been approved.
Thank you.
Okay.
We'll move on to the final application, which is NED//20/00446/F1, 1 Overton Lodge, Jetting Street, Milltown at Ashover. Over to you, Adrian.
Yes, thank you, Chair. First of all, if I may refer members to the late report of yesterday, Chair, referencing in particular paragraph 8.4 of the officer report, Chair. In this case, Chair, the applicant is seeking consent to create 2 additional off-highway parking spaces. The area of land currently comprises an area of planting and vegetation across Jetting Street from the applicant's own dwelling. Jetting Street, Chair, comprises a right-of-way, and the site again lies in the open countryside in a special landscape area. The parking, Chair, would be constructed of a permeable surface with a wall and planting area behind, and we'll see that on the drawings in a second. Policies of the development plan, Chair, seek to protect countryside areas from unacceptable development. In this case, Chair, officers conclude that the eastern side of Jetting Street retains a rural character as part of a wider countryside area sitting between Jetting Street and the River Amber, that the formalisation of the parking facility would erode that character, and that's led to the primary element of our recommendation, Chair. Members will note in the report, Chair, that a heritage statement has now been submitted and interim comments have just been received from the County Council archaeologists who, based on the submitted information, still retains an objection to the proposal on that basis. It does, however, Chair, advise that there may be ways forward of addressing that or mitigating it. So, Chair, in view of the late receipt of those comments, it's my suggestion to members that if members are minded to accept the officer recommendation on the substantive point, that an additional reason for refusal in terms of the County Council archaeologists is added, and that may either be addressed through any resubmission or addressed by the Secretary of State on appeal. If members, Chair, are minded to approve the application contrary to officer recommendation, i.e. members take the view that the parking area will not have an adverse impact, an overriding impact on the special landscape area, I would suggest, Chair, that that decision is taken subject to an appropriate resolution of the matter between the applicants and the council with the help of the County Council archaeologist, and that's in consultation with yourself and the Vice Chair, or if resolution can't be found, Chair, that the matter is then brought back to the committee for final determination. Thank you. If I can just go to the presentation now, Nikki, please. I just have to scroll through a few, Nikki, please. Okay. Chair, in this instance, as I say, the application site comprises part of the applicant's existing ownership. You can just see in the centre of the slide here, Chair, Jetting Street, which is the road I've referred to, and the applicant's existing dwelling, we'll see that on some photographs in a second, is the area to the west side of Jetting Street. The area to the right side is the other area of land owned or controlled by the applicant, and the parking area proposed is to the right-hand side of Jetting Street. Members may recall, Chair, that certainly some members will recall that permission has been granted further along Jetting Street on the western and the southern side for 3 additional dwellings to be constructed there. And we'll see part of how that is coming forward on the ground in a second in one of the photographs. Thanks, Nikki. As I say, Chair, the application site is to the right-hand side of Jetting Street, and you can just make out an element of what's proposed there. The applicant is owning the area that's outlined, Overton Lodge there. The area to the right-hand side also part of the application site. Chair, the area outlined in blue is a site that has been granted consent for a dwelling house relatively recently. Some members may recall that, and again, as I say, Chair, we'll just see how that's beginning to take place on the ground in a second on one of the photographs. But you'll see Jetting Street coming from the south and the primary highway network up between the 2 elements of ownership, and then towards the northwest. And on the right-hand side is the River Valley, the Amber Valley, and it's just alongside where you can see path in brackets. That's where the valley of the River Amber is. Thanks, Nikki. So this is the existing situation. The large block in the centre of the slide is the existing dwelling house. The area, the rectangular shape to the north of there is an area that falls within the application site that has consent to be used for a dwelling house. Again, we'll see that in a second. On the right-hand side of Jetting Street, you can just make out there's a variety of elements there, but there is a planting area and a small wall that we'll see in a second. That's the existing situation. If Nikki can just flick over to the next slide, we'll see what's proposed, and that's the area now that would be formalised as a parking area. So there would be a wall and a planting area to the east and northeast side of what would constitute 2 more formal parking spaces. Thanks, Nikki. I think we'll move on to the photographs now, Chair. The applicant's house is the building you can see in the middle of the slide there, and I presume it's his vehicle to the right-hand side of there. If members can just note that, because it's exactly opposite there where the 2 parking spaces are proposed, and you'll be able to see on the right-hand side the area that officers take the view retains a rural character and a feel, and into which would be the parking spaces. The heritage issue that's been raised is that the embankment on the right-hand side of Jetting Street is the embankment that used to carry the railway that used to access the quarry further along Jetting Street, and it's that element that the county archaeologist is still seeking some solace on, that the merits of that line would be retained should consent be granted. you can go into the next slide, Nikki, please. It's just a closer up shot of that area. You can see now just beyond where the fence is in the middle of this photograph, and just opposite Jetting Street from where the cars parked, that would be where the parking area would be formed into that vegetated area on the right hand side. You can go to the next slide, Nikki. I think that's even closer shot. That's looking in the direction, looking from the application site, Chair, back down Jetting Street. And again, we put that in to try and example what the officer view is in terms of how the one side of Jetting Street retains a rural character as opposed to the other area, which is more domesticised in terms of feel and appearance. Thanks, Nikki. This, Chair, is the area opposite where the vehicle is. This is where the parking area would be added. So the parking area dimensions set out in the report, Chair, would be into that area of vegetation that you can see there. As members will see, and as noted by the county archaeologist in his consultative reply to us, the significance of the embankment has been marginalised in this area already, and it's not as marked. And I think that's what's made his comments to the effect that there may be some mitigation or some way of addressing any loss of non-heritage asset information in that area. But again, Chair, I've set out what I propose members do should they believe that is an important element. Thanks, Nikki. Looking in the opposite direction, Chair, you can see the building in the centre of the slide. The single story element of that, i.e. that bit closest to the photographer, would be removed, and that would then form part of the site on the right hand side, for which consent has been granted for the construction of a dwelling house, and the blue vehicle there is part of the works that have recently started to form the level platform for that dwelling house to be placed within that site. And that's one of 3 units that consent's been granted by the council for dwelling houses on that side of Jetting Street. The application site, Chair, is further on, and it's opposite the 2-story element of the building, and that's at both ends, that's bookend by the chimney. So the application site where the parking area would be formed is opposite that area of the building. You can just see the low wall. It is on the other side of Jetting Street, opposite that dwelling house, and that's where the parking areas would be located. And again, Chair, we've put the photograph in to seek to example why officers contend that that side of Jetting Street still retains that feel of rural character, as opposed to the more now domesticised feel of the western side of Jetting Street. I think there may be one more, Nikki. No, not for the first time. No, I'm incorrect. Thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any clarifications regarding the slides before we move on to the speaker? No, thank you. We've got 2 objectors, I believe, so we'll start with those. So Mr. David Thomas, I've got in brackets Mike. What would you like to be known as?
Mike, please.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Thomas, you've got 3 minutes and you'll be reminded when 30 seconds are remaining. You can start anytime you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. I've submitted a written objection to this application, but such is my concern about the creeping urbanisation of the area and the threat to its exceptional qualities as a landscape, I wanted to take the opportunity to address the committee. In looking at the applicant's latest submission, it's clear that their architects have been a little economic in replaying the reasons why the first application, that's 00125, was rejected. And contrary to their claims, the revised proposals do not address the reasons given for refusal of planning permission last time. Indeed, the recently received Heritage Impact Assessment clearly demonstrates that the scheme would have a direct impact in terms of stripping out vegetation and soil, erection of fencing and removal of stone walling, potential damage and destruction to below ground features or deposits of cultural heritage value. So the applicant's architect's proposals do not mitigate this impact. In recent years, the applicant carried out unauthorised excavation of this embankment and was required to carry out reinstatement. If this proposal were to be accepted, then it would set a precedent for the removal of more of the embankment in other places. This part of Jetting Street, leading onto the Bridleway, is a very popular walking route used by both locals and visitors from the wider region, and part of a popular, very popular in fact, circular walk from the village to Milltown. It's the beauty of this landscape, which of course led to designation as a special landscape area and attracts visitors. It's something to be cherished and protected. The applicant has no satisfactory answer to Ashover's neighbourhood plan policies, AP1, limits of development, and AP13, landscape character. The reasons for rejecting the application this time are as sound as they were the first time around, and I ask the committee please to reaffirm your refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. And the next speaker is Roger Waterhouse. Mr. Waterhouse, are you there?
Yes, yes, I am. Are you receiving me?
Yes, I can hear you. You have 3 minutes when you're ready, and you're reminded when there's 30 seconds remaining.
Thank you. I really have three reasons for objecting, which are very similar to those already said, spoken by Mike. The first is to do with heritage. Milltown actually is not Ashover, it's a hamlet which is down the valley from Ashover. It's always been a working hamlet of miners and quarrymen. The local pub was the miners. The area is littered with mine shafts from lead mining, and what particular development came after extraction of lime during the 18th century, and then in the 19th century and into the 20th century, quarry works. The quarries brought prosperity. The actual Jetting Street was actually the hinge around which the industry moved. The Ashover Light Railway started its build there and went into Clay Cross, bringing fluorspar in there. That heritage finished when the quarries finished. The Milltown Quarry, which is the one that the railway track led to, mentioned, closed 75 years ago. The adjacent quarry closed only recently. That means there's a lot of brown land, and that means it's ripe for development, and it is being developed, as you've already reported. But the development is changing the character completely. As industry moves out, nature moves in, and that is why we have such an attractive part of what used to be industrial wasteland. And as Mike has already said, it is heavily used by local people and by people who come looking for the heritage. The heritage bit has been eroded and eroded and eroded. And this last bit, which is now being applied for, will be one of the last bits to be eroded. So I object to, on grounds of heritage, I object on grounds of despoiling the landscape. But the third thing is that underneath the bank, which is being proposed for removal, is the main water supply for several dwellings, my own included. And there is that's not referred to at all in terms of the planning application. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Armitage?
Thank you, Chair. Hi. Yes, you mentioned the water main. I remember it quite well, because lower down from there, there was a lay-by built, and your water supply was cut through, if I remember.
And I put that in my written objection.
Yes, and yes, I can see your point on that. Am I right that the Ashover Light Railway, that there are plans to get it going again? Would I be right in that?
there is a dream, but most of the Ash Ever Light Railway was drowned when Ogston Reservoir was flooded.
Right. Okay, that was just my point about it. Thank you.
Any further questions? No. Thank you. We'll move on to the next speaker, which is the agent, Malcolm Cook. Mr. Cook, are you there? Hello?
Hello.
Right, you have 3 minutes, Mr. Cook, and you'll be reminded when there's 30 seconds remaining.
Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak in support of the application. We wish to confirm that the proposals are actually for the use of the residents of numbers 1 and 2 Overton Lodge, who have no other such facility. We note the objectives comments. We would add that the resubmissions allow further design work to address the comments in terms of levels, appearance and heritage of the development. The proposals seek to secure an appropriate level of parking without disturbing traffic flow on Jetting Street. The proposals are agreed by the planning officer as being acceptable from a privacy and amenity point of view, with no adverse impacts upon nearby neighbours and properties. The proposals are confirmed as being acceptable from a highways point of view, but we would like to stress the positive impact of the development. The objectives note that this part of Jetting Street and Bridleway, which passes through it, is heavily used both by locals and visitors from the wider region. It is part of a very popular circular walk from the village to Milltown and back. By providing the parking, Jetting Street is no longer narrowed by parked vehicles, allowing the free flow of traffic, preventing conflict with pedestrians and horses, and so improving the amenity for all. This was demonstrated by the photographs presented by the planning officer. We note that the heritage impact statement, which is being provided, it does note that the previous removal of the original embankment, which was agreed with the planning authority some time back, and the effect of the trees and scrub reduces the research potential of the embankment here. That report suggests a moderate impact upon the significance of any surviving remains of the Quarry Line embankment. This will be mitigated by a scheme of archaeological monitoring to identify and record any below ground remains that may survive. The opportunity to discover and record such remains before their further deterioration is a further positive impact of the development. The impact upon the landscape has been addressed by the design. The site is adjacent to the roadway, and the lay-by design with parking parallel to the road is a common feature in the open countryside. The proposals will not be incongruous, and the development includes a construction of a 0.4 to 0.6 metre high berm faced with reclaimed stone and planted, thus forming an attractive feature, respecting the environment and being a significant improvement on the existing arrangement, which is no more than a line of stones along the back edge of the highway.
30 seconds remaining.
Further consideration is the sustainability of existing dwellings. It is acknowledged the location is sustainable and the residents do not need to rely on the motor car. Parking for a vehicle is one of the requirements of one-day living. The provision of parking for the dwellings ensures their long-term sustainability. In addition, we note that in 2007, the embankment opposite Brookside Cottage was similarly removed without objection to create 2 parking spaces and remains as such. In summary, the development is similar to the existing arrangement opposite Brookside Cottage. It will ensure
time, Chair.
Sustainability of the existing dwellings at Overton Lodge. The lay-by design and planted walls are appropriate for the location and of high design quality. And in addition, there will be improvements to highway safety, benefiting the users of the public right.
Mr. Cook, your time is finished. I'll ask now if there are any questions from the committee. Councillor Foster, Councillor Armitage.
Thank you, Chair. Just some clarity on you mentioned that it's for parking for number 1 and number 2, and in highway safety considerations, 7.22 on page 54 of our papers at the bottom, it says to provide parking for 2 vehicles to be used by occupiers of number 1. So just some clarity on that point first, whether it's for 1 and 2 or just for number 1. And then secondly, some clarity on whether will there be any other parking for occupiers of number 1 and number 2 if this is not granted? Thank you.
Yeah, it is for numbers 1 and number 2, both in the same ownership. And neither property currently has parking, hence the vehicle that was parked on the road. And obviously the photographs do look that the road is very narrow at that point.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Armitage, then Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Chair. It's just the fact that you're asking for 2 parking places. Well, over the last 2 years, there's been about 3 cars parked there. And as the ownership of the land adjacent where the old stables are, I mean, couldn't that have been used for parking as a suggestion? Then you don't have to buy taking down the embankment. And would I be right in saying that that embankment was taken down by the current owner and he was told to put it back to its correct height, and this hasn't been done?
I understand that the works to the embankment were agreed with the planners at the time.
Right. What about the fact that you're asking for 2 spaces when there, in fact, there's been 3 cars parked there for a considerable time?
I couldn't comment on the number of cars that were parked there. It seems reasonable to request, in terms of sustainability for the dwellings that are there, 1 parking space for each.
Right. Thank you.
Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Chair. I think mine's on a similar vein to what Councillor Armitage has just been saying. Can you clarify that the land behind that's now being developed belongs to the person that's asking for these 2 car parking spaces?
It is indeed, yes, same applicant, yes.
It is. So can I ask why it was not thought of when he put those applications in that he should retain some of that site in order to park his cars?
There isn't sufficient space on that site
to build the size of houses that he's wanting. Is that what it is? So therefore it has a knock-on effect to the parking?
The site is actually quite, it looks a large site, but it's actually quite steep, and the house is built into the bank. So in fact, there's not such an awful lot of developable land on that site.
So, sorry, again, for clarification, the 2 small stone buildings that you see that are only single story, am I right in saying they're coming down?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Cook.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for the planning officer? Councillor Barry?
It's not so much a question. I think it's more about moving officers' recommendations.
Have I got a seconder for that? Councillor Ridgway? Councillor Potts? Councillor Potts, did you want to speak, or were you just seconding?
I'm seconding.
Right, everyone's seconding. Councillor Armitage? William, we can't hear you.
Yeah. I just like a few things about this application, in that road, it feeds quite a large area of grassland, and from time to time, well, 2 or 3 times a year, it's mown and it has to come out via that road, and then it's mucked. Now, the problem is that these cars are parked there as it is, and nothing can, well, it's very difficult to get large tractors and trailers through, and some provision has to be made, because when these houses were originally built, going back in time, there were the workers, the quarry workers, and there were no cars as such. Now, as time's gone on, the road has been substantially narrowed by the fact that the cottages have put a little sort of flower bed in front, and they've narrowed it by about 2 feet. Now, you can't get a large tractor and trailer through there when there are cars parked.
You keep breaking up, William.
And I lower down.
Councillor
sorry.
Armitage, it might be worthwhile actually putting your camera off. It might actually be easier that way.
I'll try that. Right. I've gone into nothing. But I'm still here. Yeah. Everybody else has travelled away at it, as you could see, because that embankment went all the way down, well, miles down the road, and it eventually came out in Clay Cross. And everybody's travelled away without planning permission, may I add. And the latest one was just lower down, and that was when Mr. Waterhouse's water main was chopped through. And I did report it as to being illegal, what had gone on, and I was told that it was perfectly legal to have done it. Now, this guy has gone about it the right way. He's asked for planning permission, and it's been refused. And, well, the officer's recommendation is to refuse it. Now, people have to be able to park the cars, and people has to be able to get back past these these parked cars. As it is, there's problems with delivery vans because everybody orders online. They can't get through. The farmer has great difficulty getting through past these, so there has to be a provision of parking. I don't know what the answer is, so I'm leaving it to you. There has to be a provision for parking because it's a narrow pinch point where it is, and you must take this into consideration before you sort of turn this down out of hand.
Thank you, William. I'm going to speak to Councillor Foster, then Ross Shipman, and Councillor Barry. Then we must come to you and move this motion forward. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't realise we'd already opened the floor for motions. That's the first thing. I didn't realise we'd already done that. Perhaps I wasn't paying attention there. What I'd like to just make the case for is the highway safety considerations. I get the points that people have made, and I get the objections, and I also understand the recommendations and how it fits in with policy. I understand all of that, but I think we ought to all of us consider here the highway safety considerations. Is a concern of mine. And, you know, I think perhaps we ought to put greater weight on that when we come to deciding whether this wants to be given permission or not. I can understand people feeling, well, when you build these houses, you should take into account these things. Why should you have such a big house and then afterwards look for parking elsewhere? I understand those points. But from where we are now, those houses are there. I can only feel that, you know, it would benefit the safety of the road and the highway for horses, for walkers, and for other cars. So I'm inclined to think that it would be a good idea against officers' recommendations. Whether I feel strong enough to put a motion, I'm not sure, but you know, I think I'd like to hear from other people what they think on the highway safety. I don't think we've discussed that enough before we move to a vote on any motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shipman.
Thank you, Chair. I find myself agreeing with Councillor Foster and Armitage again here. I think if we're all truly being honest, I don't, and that application for the houses next door had come before us at the same time as this, I think we probably would have rejected that. But we are where we are now. These houses are there, potentially more being built. If you look at the photo where the vehicle is, from what we've seen from the presentation, it's you know, it's not. It's stopping fire engines, ambulances, you name it, getting up that road. So we, as a planning authority, need to take that into consideration. I'm not over the moon that I'm potentially being, you know, I suppose convinced to approve it against my, you know, my own heart, if you like. But at the end of the day, if you were at the other end of that road and you wanted some emergency services coming through, you'd expect us to take that into consideration when we're coming to put on to approving an application. And I think reluctantly, I'm probably going to support a motion to reject officers' recommendations and actually approve this, because I think it will improve that road. You know, and I think I'm going to put a motion forward in that vein.
Thank you. Councillor Barry, before you come in, Adrian would like to say a few words. Is that okay?
Chair, I didn't necessarily want to interrupt the debate, but there's just a couple of points I just wanted to mention to members as the debate's going along, Chair. First of all, that as we've discussed a couple of times during the meeting already, this application needs to be considered on its merits. And in that respect, Chair, members will need to first of all come to a conclusion as to whether the development is in accordance with the policies of the development plan or not. And if it is in accordance with the development plan, then i.e. there isn't any adverse impact on the character of the area, then you should be granting permission for it unless there are other matters that outweigh that. And conversely, Chair, in terms of the development plan, if you consider that it is adversely impacting the character of the area, then you need to consider other matters, whether they outweigh that. So in terms of the issues that Councillor Foster has said, talked about, highway safety, etc., and other matters, they are material matters and members can put them into the planning balance, but you need to come to a decision first of all on whether it's in accordance with your development plan policies, i.e. the proposed in accordance with your development plan policies, and then when other material matters take into consideration whether they affect that first conclusion. So that's the process that you need to follow, Chair. Just in terms of the issue of the other development, I note what members are saying about that, but in those other cases, I recall that in those cases, the parking to serve those dwelling houses is catered for on site. So that wouldn't be an issue that would lead to additional car parking or shouldn't lead to an additional car parking in those circumstances. And just finally, Chair, just before you take any motions put forward, I would just welcome a chance to come in and just remind members in respect of the archaeology matters and just to get clarity on how members may wish to deal with that. I'll help again, Chair, if members would like any further advice.
Thank you. Councillor Barry, then Councillor Shipman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As far as this case goes, and we take it, you know, like we keep saying, one by one, and everyone's different and to be treated in its own merits. I'm sorry to say, William, yes, I understand the farmer might have a problem, but that's not part of this issue and shouldn't be taken into consideration. I think it's not in accordance with our development plan, and I don't think it should be. I don't think a motion should be put forward to go against officers' recommendations. I think if those people that live in that property have built a walled garden outside the front on the public highway, as it would have been, then those walls need to be removed so that will widen that roadway again. I think it just strikes me as being a bit odd, the fact that this person knows they need parking, but then goes ahead and does developments on another part where he could have actually utilised some of that parking. And I think if we start to let them encroach onto our historic grounds, and because the archaeological people don't agree with it, then I think we're going a step too far. So I'm sticking with my original things to stay with officers' recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Shipman.
Thank you, Chair. It's worth pointing out actually that over Ashover Parish, there's many passing places which you would this will look like just in any other passing place as far as I can tell, because the roads down there are very thin. They aren't meant for double traffic, and you know, yes, we need to take this application on its merit, but that doesn't mean we can't take in outside factors that will affect this application. And I think we do seriously need to look at actually approving this to improve the area, in my opinion, because, you know, cars are going to be parked along the sides of those properties anyway. So therefore, you're still getting a row of cars there. It's just we're talking about a matter of here between You know, are they right up against the building, or are they 5 meters away? And I think that if this can improve the road layout, as well as offering these residents some parking so we can allow emergency services and stuff to pass, then I think we really need to consider that.
Councillor Armitage.
Yeah, if I could just come back on that. It's not just a farmer we're talking about. We're talking about people higher up the valley. And we're also talking about dustbin lorries. Now, there's a dustbin lorry that goes there. It's a special small one, and it has to back down to to Mr. Waterhouse's property to being able to get in. And that's the sort of thing that they have to come by. And, you know, there's got to be some sort of lay-by or something constructed where these cars get off the road, because one day someone's going to have a heart attack and they're going to have to get an ambulance down there pretty quickly.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to support Councillor Shipman and his comments, and to say he was a little bit ahead of me there, and I should have been on the ball when it came to emergency services, but a very good point that you're not going to fit a fire engine down there with those vehicles parked there. I can understand people's frustration about they should have put car parking spaces there. They should take a wall down. That's not within our power. It is within our power now to give permission for 2 parking spaces to make it easier for all residents, so that these ambulances can get down, bin lorries can get down, and fire engines too. So all of those things. And for myself, I don't know how we'd work it into a motion, but I'd happily support Councillor Shipman and second a motion if he was so inclined to put one together. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Shipman.
Yes, Chair, I'll put a motion forward to go against officers' decisions on the basis that I don't think it's an issue. I think it does fit the development plan in the fact that we're actually providing space for them to park away from the road, and therefore making it a lot easier for emergency service to travel down there, for ramblers to use that area without there being unnecessary danger to those that are actually using that road. We can talk all day about, shoulda, coulda, woulda. Fact is, a previous decision has been taken, and we are now at a stage where we need to take a positive decision on actually what we're doing with it. And we can, like Councillor Foster says, we can actually introduce this parking space and make it a lot easier for the residents in surrounding areas.
Thank you. Councillor Ridgway.
Yeah, I just want some clarification if I can. So if we agree to give them the 2 parking spaces, and then people are going to have 2 more spaces to park alongside that road. So to me, it's not going to make any difference, because people are still going to be parking to park their cars to go rambling. Am I right or am I wrong?
You're right. Councillor Armitage, if it's something different that we've already heard.
Yeah, you're wrong. I walk that road twice a day with my dog, and on many occasions it's quite it's a tight fit. Yeah, I am a big lad, I know. But when you see people trying to get through, and delivery vans trying to get through because the sat nav says it's okay to, then I have to combat that together with off-roaders at the weekends, quad bikers, and all the rest of it. And with those cars parked there, it's a hazard, and that's all there is to it. I can't see it's going to make much difference to the environment or anything like that, because it's all the way down. People have made their own, and that embankment's been got rid of all the way down. And this isn't going to, one extra one isn't going to have a great impact. And after all, those cottages, it isn't a question of somebody having the cottage building something there with no provision. Those cottages have been there since the 1800s when there were no cars, but now there are cars, and we have to pay provision for them.
Thank you. And all right, I understand that Adrian wants to come in here. Adrian, we can't hear you.
Apologies, Chair. Yes, just very briefly, if you're moving to the vote on the motion put forward by Councillor Shipman, Chair, I think just for the record, we just need to be clear that members in taking their decision either do or don't consider there's an adverse impact on the character of the area, because if they don't, then it's in accordance with the draft plan, as I think as Councillor Shipman alluded to, and therefore you don't need to have significant matters to outweigh that conclusion. Whereas if the conclusion was that there was an adverse impact, then you would need to state that and the other factors outweigh that harm. And just finally, Chair, just before you do move to the vote on Councillor Shipman's motion, which I believe is the next step, just how we deal with the archaeology issues. And the option for members would be to include a condition as set out in the submitted archaeology statement, that there's a record taken of any archaeological features that are found. The other alternative, Chair, as I explained at the start, would be to see if a resolution could be found to that matter. But that does, of course, leave open issues that Councillor Shipman and Councillor Foster haven't discussed, i.e. potential of coming back on that issue alone. And I'm not sure from the debate that that's the intention of Councillor Shipman and Councillor Foster. My understanding is that you would be happy just having a condition on to ensure that there is appropriate record taking of any archaeological factors that are found, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Shipman.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I don't think there's an adverse effect. I think that, like I said, there's laybys all throughout the parish of Ashover on these tight roads, just because there has to be. In terms of the archaeology thing, supposedly we can delegate that to yourself to be satisfied that the necessary surveys or reports have submitted to the district council, and if planning manager and yourself, Chair, are satisfied, then they can proceed with laying the tarmac and whatever else the next step is after that.
Thank you. I'm just going to confer with Alan. Alan, because Councillor Barry has put a motion forward and it was seconded, should that be heard first?
Well, I think we're in a similar position to the previous application, Chair. We've now got two applications. Two motions. The first motion was to approve officer recommendations, and that was seconded. And then we have the second motion, which is basically to reject officer recommendations and accept the application. So again, I think they're diametrically opposed. So from that point of view, I would have thought that you would have to take the first motion first, and then depending on what happens on that motion, move to the second.
Thank you. Councillor Barry, would you like to put your motion forward again, please?
Yes, Chair. I'd like to move that we stay with officers' recommendations that are detailed in the report.
Councillor Ridgway, are you still happy to second this motion? Thank you. Nikki, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, of course. Members, if you could clearly indicate for, against or abstain. The vote for would be to refuse the application. Councillor Armitage.
Against.
Councillor Barry.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Elliott.
Against.
Councillor Foster.
Against.
Councillor Huckabee. Councillor Huckabee, I'm just giving you a prompt to unmute.
Against.
Councillor Potts.
For.
Councillor Powell.
Against.
Councillor Reader.
For.
Councillor Ridgway.
For.
Councillor Rouse.
For.
Councillor Ruff.
For.
Councillor Shipman.
Against.
Okay, Chair, that is 7 votes for with 6 against and 0 abstention, which means officer recommendation to refuse has been carried.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. We can move to item 5, planning appeals lodged and determined.
Move them, Chair.
Everybody happy with that?
Yes, second that.
Thank you. Item 6 is matters of urgency. Now, although there's no matters of urgency, I would ask that if at all possible, members stay on for some clarity to discuss the paper that was sent out to you. And there's one other item that's come on board as well. So if everyone's happy with that.
Okay, Chair, but are you now formally ending the meeting?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So if we could stop the live broadcast.